just want you to know that Muslims are very forgiving people.
They are?
Yes, we are. We're very
Really?
forgiving.
Huh.
Well, it's true.
There's a lot of Meshuggah Muslims, though, running around. Are there not?
Well, since I started exploring the historical document known as the Sira, which is the biography of the Prophet Muhammad, I started to discover that Muhammad's success as a spiritual leader was almost entirely due to his success as a military leader. In other words, he wasn't really winning over too many hearts and minds based on preaching alone. It wasn't until he became a warrior that he started to grow a real following. And so the pattern of Muhammad's life was such that he went from orphan to merchant to preacher to politician to warlord and finally to a virtual king of Arabia. And when he died, he was still only in his mid-60s, which I personally consider rather young. So say what you want about Muhammad, you gotta admit, he stayed busy. What's so astounding to me about the early spread of Islam was that it seemed like merely a blip in world history. Just a handful of little battles off in some desert wasteland, small armies, primitive weapons, relatively low stakes. What's more is that just as Arabia was falling to Islam, it was the fight between Persia and the Byzantines that was considered the real conflict. That was the real action. And yet, those empires are no longer with us. They're gone. Lost in the sands of time. And Islam lives on. Islam thrives worldwide. It even exists in several regions outside the Middle East. So I am fully aware that there are Quranic scriptures that indeed teach a certain kind of brotherly love, charity, hospitality, which is all good stuff. And by comparison to many of its contemporaries, the Quran was an exceptional moral code. And to a limited extent, it does contain a message of anti-slavery and pro-equality. Now, it doesn't go so far as to ban slavery outright, but there is an effort to regulate it, to make the lives of slaves a little less stressful. That's an improvement. What I really want to talk about here is how the Prophet Muhammad changed the nature of combat in Arabia. As a military general, he ordered raids, surprise attacks, mass executions. Some of that activity is just normal human behavior for that time and place. Some of it, he actually ratcheted up the violence. Example, it was during the siege of Khyber in which Muhammad ordered his men to plunder towns, chop off heads, even to take women as pleasure slaves. Weirdly reminiscent of ISIS. There's one thing that we know for sure about the Prophet Muhammad. His masculinity was never in question. There was an allegedly beautiful teenage Jewish girl that he wanted to take for a wife after her entire family was killed in the siege of Khyber. The problem was one of his soldiers had already claimed her, so Muhammad traded seven of his female slaves in order to get her. Such a player. To this day, the Battle of Khyber is still considered by some to be a proud moment in the spread in the development of the Islamic world. I think it's worth mentioning that Khyber was established by Arabian Jews, and it was one of the most prosperous settlements in all of Arabia. The Jewish people were the artisan class, they built up the marketplaces, they even introduced the date palm farming industry to the Arabian Peninsula. But sadly, after Khyber fell to Muhammad, it was kind of the beginning of the end of Jewish life on the Arabian Peninsula. There's another incident in Khyber in which Muhammad ordered that a certain Jewish man be tortured so that his Muslim soldiers could go off and find some treasure that the Jewish guy had hidden someplace. Well, after they finally located the goods, they just came back and chopped the guy's head off after all. And I don't think they had to. I think they did it for personal reasons. It really is a testament to the notion that Muhammad's brutality and the wealth that came along with it was very appealing to the native Arabians. That was what really grew his numbers. On another occasion, Muhammad instructed one of his soldiers to use deception in order to kill a guy. So when one of Muhammad's assassins came to him and complained to him that he couldn't get close enough to one of his targets, Muhammad suggested something to the effect of, have you tried lying? Maybe it'll help. And so the assassin just came up with a good old-fashioned lie in order to get into close proximity of his victim, and then he managed to run a sword through him. The interesting wrinkle in this particular episode was the fact that the man who was killed was actually a Jewish guy, shocking, who was guilty of writing poems that were disparaging Muhammad and ridiculing Islam. That was the original reason for issuing the hit. And this clearly illustrates not just the duplicity of the Prophet, but also the intolerance of any sort of criticism. Now, I got to go on record here and say that none of the information in this video presentation is meant to be taken personally. It's not meant to be insulting. I have known many outstanding Muslim people, wonderful families, fantastic kids, intelligent, educated, loving, the rest of it. All good things. Also, the tension between Muslims and Jews is not unique. However, the Christian world at one time persecuted Jewish people for 4 bloody centuries, but I think those days are kind of over. It's orders of magnitude less bad than it used to be. Admit it. The life of Muhammad is so fascinating. It's so compelling. They should make a show about it. They probably won't because it's kind of risky. So until then, just get the book, man. You'll finish this thing in like 48 hours. It's that good.